Hi everyone, and welcome back to the second game of round 2 of the Star City Games Invitational Qualifier Legacy event. We have John Ingham on the right playing Bug Delver, who's 1-0 up against James Corwood's Blue-White Miracle deck. And how do you think these decks are going to have sideboarded for this game, Lee?
Well, I expect James to bring in more answers to John's Shroud of Creatures like Nimble Mongoose, which will probably splash over and deal with all his other ones. I expect him to bring in Engineer Disposal. John's probably bringing in some other ways to interact with Counterbalance tops, such as probably Corrosion Grip. I don't know how many copies of Abrupt Decay he's running main deck, but he may bring the extra ones of them. There's a variety of things as well John could bring in. He may be going up on his Planeswalkers, trying to fight like the mid-late game a bit better, as opposed to being all in on his early tempo game.
Sounds good. And John started off on Tropical Island, very nice Tropical Island. Are those ones that he's done himself, those Tropical Islands?
Yeah, he's traded into some played dual lands, and then he's actually, you remember the Guru lands with the nice picture of the sun going over at various angles?
Yeah.
Well, he's got the entire Guru going over most of his lands.
That's very nice indeed. Shiny Tarmogoyf as well, so obviously no expense spared on this Bug Delver deck.
No, that's why it looks like John's playing a Battle's Blitz deck. He's double sleeved up his deck due to the substantial work.
This is something that you can certainly... this is something that we see a lot of in Legacy, isn't it? You don't see it so much in Standard because of how quickly the cards rotate. But in older formats like Legacy and obviously Vintage if you're a millionaire, there's an awful lot of, shall we say, customization that goes on.
Yeah, there's a lot of customization. What happens in Legacy a lot is you generally play a deck and fall in love with it, and then all you want to do is make it look a lot prettier and really pimp it out.
I think we were in the lobby of the hotel the night before the tournament when someone showed you was it a Goblin deck that was totally foil?
Yeah, it was totally foil. I'm maybe slightly bitter about that. You are looking at some quite ridiculous prices for some foils, though it's an unfortunate thing that the secondary market, some things are a lot lower than others.
Sorry, well, you're not just bitter because he killed you with Belcher the next day.
No, I was bitter he didn't play the Goblin then. It was quite upsetting.
You actually think that Goblins is quite a good choice in the metagame, or was it?
It was until everyone started playing Jund and Esper Blade. So the Jund deck has 4 Engineered Plagues in the sideboard because it has problems dealing with Lingering Souls quite a lot of the time. It slows down its attack plan and lets Esper get into its late game. So the splash aid from that is they can just slam 2 down on Goblins, and that's all she wrote generally.
Yeah. Now, unfortunately for those of you who are expecting a quick game, James has got Counterbalance top down on his side of the board. So if you're John at this point, I'd say as someone who's played a lot of Legacy and certainly Old Extended, what would you try and do at this point to break this Counterbalance top lot?
John's basically looking to pressure James's resources as much as possible to stop him actually ending the game with Entreat the Angels. I mean, John needs to draw some more lands so he can cast multiple spells in a turn. The Deathrite Shaper does open that up a little bit for him, because if he does Wasteland, that's 2 sources of black he could have if he does draw that Abrupt Decay.
And we're just having a little bit of an argument about how you should announce your triggers here for Counterbalance, something that's become rather important recently.
Yeah, with the new changes to the triggers and things, you can't say it was implied anymore that you was going to use the trigger. What James should be doing is, as soon as John casts a spell, just say, put my Counterbalance trigger on the stack, respond to my Counterbalance trigger, and sends his Divining Top. So then he stacks his deck, top 3 cards, and reveals the cost of his choice to counter it, or activates the top, as you saw, to count with a 1-drop.
Now, another thing that Legacy players sometimes can be a bit more shall we say, tenacious about, or maybe just a bit tidier overall, is how they, I would say, stack their resources. So set things apart, announce things, make sure their graveyard's in the right order, continue to be basically kind of fastidious about that sort of thing.
Well, due to the amount of interactions in Legacy, you've got to be clear what you're doing. And as to the graveyard, you can get the warnings up to a game loss. for rearranging your graveyard due to certain cards interacting with things, such as I believe Nether Spirit, Shallow Grave, the ones that spring to mind.
Yeah, Nether Shadows. Well, there were some others in. I think Manaless Dredge was one of those kind of. Was it Ashen Ghoul? I think was another.
I think
one
that one. That's the semi-Icarid, isn't it?
Yeah, it's the I'm not quite an Icarid, but this was from a time when we didn't print cards as powerful as Icarid. By the way, Necropotence was in the same set.
That's an interesting thing about Legacy. If you look at the Legacy decks, like if you look at the table at the minute, there's a card from the new set on the table pretending to be a Planeswalker that costs 1 mana, Deathrite Shaman. And then in the move from game, you've got a Tarmogoyf, and then in John's graveyard you've got a Delver of Secrets. Considering you've got the entirety of Magic's creature pool to choose from, that says a lot about power creep, I think.
Certainly in terms of creatures, I believe. Creatures, as someone who has enjoyed casting the occasional Wrath of God through his magic career, I would have to say that creatures on the whole have just become more and more powerful. So, I mean, when I started playing the game, Jackalputt was seen as the god of all red creatures, and now no one would be seen dead playing that in a red deck.
Yeah, he's been replaced by Goblin Guy. He's a little bit better, however, I am quite nostalgic for some good old Jackalputt beats.
Until your opponent firestorms you, and then you feel really bad.
Especially if you have 2 of them.
Yes. But going back to the game state here, rather than reminiscing over old tournaments, although it looks like we're probably going to have plenty of time to do so, it looks like John is struggling a bit on his mana here, and James is developing nicely.
Yeah, he's just shuffled away his Spur Senses Divining Top that he had on his deck. He's just going to hopefully set up a 1 or 2 and a 3 on top of there, and he's quite happy to just keep doing that, and he'll look for his land every turn. I assume he's going to keep all his fetch lands in play instead of cracking them until he does want to make a move with a game-ending spell like Chase the Mind Sculpture or Treat the Angel, because it gives him the extra shot at hitting on his counterbalance.
Now, how would you be, I would say at this point in Jim's position, how would you be stacking your library with the Sensei's Divining Top?
When I was playing the Sensei's Divining Top counterbalance deck, the only answer really was Corrosion Grip, so you used to float a 3 on top of your deck as much as possible. I mean, there is points where your opponent can always interact with you with that anyway, and unless you are willing to draw the 3. And then it's not on top of your deck, so they can interact with you. So it's quite an awkward thing to do. So he's just looking at John's mana, he's probably going to leave 1s and probably a 2 on top, because if John doesn't cast a 2, he doesn't cast a 1 instead. He can just activate the top. However, that does leave him vulnerable to removal on the Senses Divining Top from John.
Now, I suppose that obviously James's biggest fear from John is more likely going to be Abrupt Decay rather than Crows and Grip, even though John probably has access to both. You'd imagine he's going to have the full 4 Abrupt Decay, would you?
After sideboard, surely. I'm sure he will have. I know John does play 4 of his 75. There's also Maelstrom Pulse to consider, but that's sorcery speed threat, so it's not as scary. He can't really outstack his top activation with that.
One thing though, I was thinking a little bit regard to the Bug Delver deck against more like a deck like Rug Delver. You don't see many 3s in the Rug Delver deck.
Yeah, the Rug Delver deck doesn't generally go past 2 because it uses its mana to either shuffle its spell lands away with Brainstorm or to blow up its opponent's land with its Wastelands. Bug Delver has been known to play a Pernicious Deed, Shardless Agent. I don't believe John's playing Shardless Agent because we saw a Daze in game 1, and that's quite a bad cast game.
Might we see something like Life from the Loam here from John, do you think?
Yeah, you could see Life from the Loam. John may have even brought in his own counterbalances and tops.
Okay. We have Dark Confident from John here, and it does appear like he's trying to establish a board presence, although do you think that James might just be baiting him a little bit?
He may just be baiting a little bit into a Terminus to get as much value as possible, and then if John is playing on to his empty board into a counterbalance, it's probably one of the most depressing things to do in Magic.
I think that just counterbalance is one of the most depressing things in Magic, to tell you the truth.
Well, it does depend on what side you're on.
Yeah. But someone's always depressed when that card's in play.
Yep, I can agree with that.
Now, if James doesn't have a Terminus here, he's actually on quite a clock, and John's going to be drawing 2 cards a turn as well, so he's going to be looking to stop this, you've got to think, in some form or another.
Yeah, it would be the most amusing line James could take would be to drop a moat and let John's Bob kill him, but I don't even know if he's playing moat.
Yeah.
That might be another obscure line and reason why he let the Dark Confidence go, but he could just have not had a 2 on top of his game.
Yeah.
And John did test the waters with the Snapcaster Mage at end of turn.
And I suppose James would have put a 2 on top anyway at that point, just to stop the just to basically stop a clock being in play.
Yeah, that's the advantage of playing flash creatures into countermounts, because he doesn't want, unless he does have the Terminus, James doesn't want John to advance his clock in any way. So casting the instant speed 2 that John doesn't really care about that much, and it not being countered, kind of give John an indication that he's probably okay to try Tarmogoyf or Bob the next turn.
Okay, it looks like 4 guys coming, 4 damage coming over the hill, and with that polluted delta that John's got there, he's now got access to black, so James is definitely on a bit of a severe clock here if he can't find that Terminus.
Yep, that is correct. Maybe John has the Abrupt Decay now, but I imagine he'd have pulled the trigger on Wasteland if he did have the Abrupt Decay and just cast it off the Deathrite chain, or used the effects that he removed previously to deal with it. You don't generally sit under counterbalance and sandbag a removal spell for it. Although I can maybe see reasoning for John doing this. If he doesn't feel like he can then add enough pressure to the board after he's done it, he maybe wanted to wait until he had the 4 mana and total to cast a big threat after he's dealt with the turn.
Oh, it looks like John's going for a 3 here. And that's a Liliana of the Veil.
That's definitely going to pressure James on. He's probably going to. The thing is, with counterbalance, every card you stop is essentially you drawing a card more than your opponent. It's a source of free card advantage.
Yeah.
Maybe as a cumulative upkeep of 1, but it is still quite a potent thing.
Yeah. And it's like James is around there. Or is John looking at the I think John might be looking to do something like stifle the counterbalance trigger here.
Yeah, if he does that, it's an interesting way to play around. If James doesn't have a 1 on top, if John stifles, then he has to flip the top, and the second trigger, which is on the the first trigger, which is on the Liliana, will then only be for a 1.
And that's
so the Liliana would roll, and that's exactly what John's done.
Yep.
So James is reordering the top of his library to. I'm guessing he's got a 1 on there to get on the stifle. Which is bad times for John.
And it looks like James revealed Sensei's Divining Top there, so it looks like John's pretty much in all sorts of trouble at this point.
Yeah, it's not looking good for him.
It does look like we've got a little bit of, again, the whole stacking triggers issues coming up here.
Yeah, I think he forgot, because John stifled the first trigger. I don't believe James put another trigger on or something along those lines. There was a bit of confusion there about whether there was a trigger for the Liliana or whether he was responding to what he was exactly responding to.
It's another one of those things where you've just got to be very clear about what you're doing in Legacy.
Yeah, John would have been well within his rights to call a judge on both the times there, and James would have been on his second warning, which is not a good place to be. However, you generally see a lot of play like this in Legacy. People are a bit more lenient if it's then explained to them what they were trying to do, or with the new rulings, the whole thing that it's not implied. In Legacy, the players kind of understand a lot what's going on and what people should be doing, so they can be quite lenient. But if you're playing for money, don't expect it at all.
No, I wouldn't expect it either, to tell you the truth. Now the game has just ground to a little bit of a halt at this point, and is this where you would be sort of asking for a bit of a hurry up here from the guy who's got the top in play?
Yeah, probably. I mean, there are quite a lot of complicated decisions involved, but unless he cracks a fetch land, there is only 1 new card he sees every turn.
So is it really a case of knowing what your game plan is ahead of time and then and making sure that you play to that game plan?
It's more remembering what you've got on top of your deck and having the confidence not to need to check.
Yeah.
Like, because unless John casts a spell, there's no reason to activate top here really, unless he's actually floating, you know, like a previously mentioned 3 in case of Crows and Grip or something.
Yeah.
John seems to have sorted his land situation out now. He's practically flooded for his deck, I believe. Now.
Yeah, I mean, anything above 3 lands and a Delver deck's really not where you... do you think there's any merit here in wastelanding one of those Tundras?
It depends whether he's brought or has Jace the Mind Sculptor in his 75. He does want to have that 4 mana, and then knowing John, he's probably playing Flutterstorm or Spell Pierce, more than likely Flutterstorm, because it is John, he does love that card. So he's probably looking to set up casting maybe a Jace the Mind Sculptor, and then countering whatever James does to try and stop it that isn't counterbalance.
And there's a counterbalance of his own. Now, I've got to admit that at this point, watching the match, my first instinct was to start screaming.
It generally just means, because John doesn't have a top, it generally just means nothing really changes. If John gets lucky, James doesn't get to play any spells to affect the board. Unfortunately, he does have a counter spell, or fortunately for James.
Fortunately for everyone watching. And spinning the top again at end of turn.
Yeah, so he must be floating perhaps a 2 or a 3 on top of that, because that was quite a swift switch around.
I think he might...
a way to get a new fresh 3 on top if he needs it.
It's one of the interactions with miracles as well that you've got to be a little bit careful about, I suppose. That you can shuffle your library, you can draw the card, put the miracles trigger on the stack, and then use the use fetch lands before you pay for an Entreat the Angels or a Terminus, etc.
Yeah, it's definitely a nice little interaction that I'm not sure everybody knows about, but it is a very nice thing that's involved.
Of course, with Stifle involved as well, you can end up with all sorts of very complex board states.
Yeah, you can end up with a situation where James reveals the miracle, cracks a fetch land to pay for it, John then stifles the fetch land or the miracle trigger. It kind of leaves James in a bad situation because then he's going to flip the top. Or if it's not in his turn, he's already flipped the top, he's definitely in a bad situation because John will be responding to the top flip as well, I imagine, at some point. Because if he waits, there would be a 1 on top and the stifle wouldn't do anything.
And it's the old adage of it's the old style sort of stack with 8 different effects on it, not all of which have the word storm written on them.
Yeah, it's quite complicated. It's looking like John's probably going to start trying to drain James out here.
I think he's also trying to please the camera at this point, just getting getting his shiny shiny altered fetch duels in play as much as he can.
Yeah, you've got to make the best of your time in front of the camera.
Yeah. Looks like John drains James down to 3 there.
Yeah, he's looking quite hurry. James has to have some kind of interaction from the actual board. I mean, he's tied it up so John can't really cast any spells, but what he's got on the board is doing quite a lot of work. Yeah. And John does have a lot of Deathrite Shamans in his hand as well, he has 2.
Yeah.
It's not ideal when your opponent has counterbalance top, so if you're drawing 1-drops.
So it looks like John's just thinking, oh, what's happening here? I mean, you've got to think in John's position here, basically the only thing you're scared of is Terminus.
Yeah, this will be the last, well, if James doesn't have Terminus, or a combination of Terminus and Swords. Maybe Vendilion Cleat can do some work here as well if he's got that. I mean, it does look bad for James unless he has the Miracle, and inversely, he does have the Miracle, it's looking very good for him. Yeah,
then again, he spent so much time topping, you've got to believe there's a Terminus on top of his library at this point. Unless
or an Entreat would be fine here as well.
Although an Entreat would see him at... He'd have to have a Swords to back up the Entreat, otherwise the Deathrite's just going to kill him.
Yeah, James actually paused to see if John does actually have a Stifle for the top activation, which is a very good move. You've got to give your opponent a chance to respond to everything in the league. So.
Yeah, I remember judge or player meetings for extended tournaments and legacy tournaments. The one thing is that judges tend to emphasise is, guys, this is a format where Stifle is a played card. Whenever you have a triggered ability or a activated ability, wait and give your opponent a chance to respond.
Yep, it does slow things down a little bit, but it's better than having the awkward situation where you've got to back up and the judge is called. And it just gets like free information can be given away on both sides, and you might end up with a warning as well.
I think it's best practice anyway, just to, whenever you do something, always give your opponent a chance to respond.
Yeah, there's interesting situations that arrive with like the free spin out spells like Force and Days, where you're responding to cracked fetch lands in response to your spells you've cast.
Yeah.
Like say your opponent's got a fetch land and they cast a 1-drop and you force a will the 1-drop, and then they crack the fetch land, you can then Daze the 1-drop and make sure it doesn't. Your Daze will resolve before the fetch land triggers, so they don't have the mana to pay for it, things like that. And there is the Terminus. We expect John to drain him for 2, putting him to 1. Kind of hope he can at some point get something to it.
I mean, if he's got a Snapcaster Mage in his hand, you can always drop that at end of turn and hope it's good.
Yeah, unfortunately James is going to get to replay his top this turn, and then look at another 2-3 cards with it.
I think that if you're in John's case, do you just play the Snapcaster now, knowing that the top is on top?
I think I would, yes. I think that's what I'd do. Just because, you know, the top is the... I mean...
Well, there's Dark Confidence. That's probably better than Snapcaster Mage, to tell you
this. Bit, yeah. I mean, he has the mana, he may have a Snapcaster for the end of turn. You've got to look to reload the board, because as I said before, you can't play against Counterbalance into an empty board, because you're just not going to get there. Unfortunately, that is a Brainstorm, and if James does have a 2 in his hand, he can put that back on top of the deck, and then resolve his Counterbalance trigger and count the Bob, which would leave John doing the unthinkable, which is trying to beat Counterbalance top with nothing on the board.
I mean, Counterbalance top is especially brutal against a deck like Rogue Delver or Bug Delver, and the fact that all your cards are centered around 1s and 2s, and that's exactly what the Miracles deck has to counter you.
Yeah, basically after this point, if that Dark Confidence does get countered, John is just looking to draw Abrupt Decay and hope James doesn't have the second Counterbalance. Because that's a lot of stuff that will happen. James might make a backup Counterbalance, and unless John's got Maelstrom Pulse and it doesn't have a 3, there's no really downside to that.
Do you suppose that maybe... I mean, we mentioned a little bit earlier that Deathrite Shaman is Bug Delver's way of having reach. Again, at this point, with your opponent on 1, James is going to be thinking, well, there's no way John can actually kill me without some sort of presence on the board.
He's never going to let the Deathrite resolve after this stage. It looks like Bob's come into play, so I'm guessing James has a Swords in his hand.
If he doesn't, that's a little awkward.
Oh, he has a Detention Sphere, that's good enough.
He had that for a little bit of
it's only for a while, yeah. See, that is the bad side of Counterbalance. You are letting your opponent know what you've got in your hand. What used to happen is you would top, reveal your card, and then at the end of their turn you would top again and shuffle around the top of your library, even if that was the card you were looking to draw, just to try and hide some information.
Yeah.
And then it got even more convoluted in the Counterbalance merits. It was more about tracking where your opponent's cards were than making any significant plays at any point.
And there's a Snapcaster from
John. It looks like James has got another Terminus or a sword on top of him.
It's a Terminus. And it looks like John's got no interaction with it, which
is unfortunate, because if he had
Daze or Force of Will,
Force of Will stifle, then it's game over. And now with the turn being passed, unless John has another instant speed threat followed up by something in his turn, it's looking quite grim. I mean, I would probably be considering conceding this against John.
Although I suppose from John's point of view at this point, he's still just an Abrupt Decay away from getting that'd be Jace the Mind Sculptor.
Jace just kind of sells it. So John Dillard must have had that Spell Pierce and didn't choose to counter the Terminus.
Although the question is here, he knows that James has flipped his top, so that Spell Pierce should be... oh, no, he did draw his top for the turn, yeah, you are correct.
Well, James did set his library up correctly there, because he knew he was going to try and resolve Jace. He was probably a bit concerned about Force Will, but there was nothing he could do about it, so he just left that one there just to protect his guy.
And obviously because he flipped the top with to reveal the Terminus last turn, that Spell Pierce was useless from John, because he couldn't Spell Pierce the Terminus.
He had the one. So that's top doing a bit of double duty there, as drawing the Terminus, protecting the Terminus, and allowing the Brainstorm to protect the Jace the next turn.
So if you're John at this point, are you just looking to scoop up here and move on to game 3? I mean, this looks pretty ropey for you, or are you still in the case of I'm still just an... Because he can't say he's an abrupt decay from winning now, because Jace is just going to make him pick up his death right shame, and if that comes...
The issue is, it's kind of like a bit of a catch situation, because he's James at 1, so John feels like he's so close, but without the actual reach, he's looking to try and resolve either an abrupt decay on the counterbalance and then make his own Jace to deal with Jace and whatnot. There's a lot of plays he's got to go correctly for John without James having any interaction. So I'd probably just scoot them up and go to game 3 and try and get a fast tempo draw against him.
I mean, James could always just crack a fetch line, right?
I'm not sure that's a valid line of play. If it was game 3, I'd probably just wait and see if he makes a mistake and does it.
I mean, we're looking towards the 30-minute mark. I mean, we're coming up to 26 minutes on this game, and don't forget that we've cut out all the shuffling at this point as well. With the first game taking 11 minutes and this one heading towards 30, there can't be more than 5 minutes left on the round at this point. So is John maybe holding out to see if James can't kill him in time?
That Jace is going to kill him way before the round ends. He's just going to use his ultimate. I mean, the other thing John could do is, it's a bit cheesy, but it's still within the rules, is John basically every turn just draws a card, thinks a little bit, passes the turn until he gets up to 7 in hand, and then he's got another 7 cards he's got to go through before he decks, which then may take him to the end of the match.
Yeah, I mean, that was maybe one line you can take, is just not cast anything, supposedly, and then it's like, well, you've got to get through another 7 turns.
Yeah, I've had that happen to me a couple of times, unfortunately. Jace does not win the game immediately. He is better than all, but he doesn't actually deal your opponent 20 damage.
No, that is true.
The thing is, if John moves into the next game, he's got quite a if he gets Delver into Tarmogoyf and then can protect them, he's got quite a quick clock. He can possibly stop James having any kind of mana. You know, I think a third game would definitely... John would be favourite to win and James would be a real dog.
Yeah, I very much doubt the Miracles deck can win in that sort of period of time, can it?
You have to go like land, entreat for 2.
And hope the entreat resolves through days and everything else.
Assuming John does nothing.
Yeah.
I mean, 4/4 Angels are a quick way to finish the game.
There is that, but there is the other side of it, that John can actually abrupt decay the Angels as well, and there's very little you can do about it. So really it looks like waiting for the inevitable more than anything at this point. That's Deathrite Shaman for John.
I think James feels like he's under a lot more pressure than he actually is.
And John is actually going to stifle the top activation here.
Yeah, because you would assume at this point James doesn't want to put his top on top of the deck unless, you know, he doesn't have a 1.
So the counterbalance trigger is still on the stack at this point with the...
So there's on the stack currently there's Deathrite Shaman, counterbalance trigger, top activation, stifle, counterbalance trigger.
Brainstorm now.
And now a brainstorm. It's going to be unfortunate for John if James does have an extra 1 in his hand.
But if he does, that just counters absolutely everything.
Yeah, and just reveals it a couple of times and puts John's spells into his graveyard.
Well, he reveals it, flips the top, reveals the top, counters the... Yeah, first top trigger, reveals brainstorm. How many brainstorms has James seen in this game?
It generally will go down to that in the late game of who sees the most brainstorms. I mean, John does have Snapcaster Mage for his as well, but it was that stumble early on in the game on his mana, just meant he couldn't apply any kind of pressure.
Plus the fact he's drawn 0 abrupt decays this game, which really hasn't
quite unfortunate.
And at this point, Jace is going to basically say, unless you have an abrupt decay above a card I don't want you to have.
Yeah, it's like, I'm assuming James has a backup counterbalance at this point in his hand as well. I'd have tried to set that up at some point. Basically, John gets to keep any card that isn't Jace the Mind Sculptor or Abrupt Decay.
Yeah. Because nothing else in his deck actually matters at this point.
Yep. And John's played a land there for some reason. I think he's just going to keep trying to cast the Deathrites in his hand. I'm not sure where he's going with his line. If he is trying to run the clock down, I still think drawing up to 7 cards is a better way to do it. Not that I can condone running down the clock purposely in a match.
Game has just gone past the 30-minute point at this match, and this is one of the problems of playing Blue-White Miracles, or a deck that's very difficult to. Your opponent is kind enough to scoop at that point.
Yeah, a lot of the time when previously when the Curtwell's top deck was a massive player in Legacy as opposed to being Blue-White Miracles now, it was Ninja Roman, Enlightened Tutor, and Thopter Foundry Sword of the Meat. It was just your opponent realising they'd actually lost you were waiting for. That was the problem.
Well, unfortunately, we're not going to have time for Game 3 in this one. This match took so long, so unfortunately these two are both going to drop into the draw bracket.